Okay. Yeah, I really want to appreciate the organizers and Sean and the team for the opportunity for us to, for me to come for this meeting to make a presentation on the recent publication that was done by the Commission, the West African Commission on Drugs. Like you had Jane mentioned, the West African Commission on Drug is actually a West Africa initiative that was convened by the former UN Secretary General, who is actually now late, Kofi Annan, who provided the required leadership to open up the space for us to talk about drugs, for us to discuss this issue that affects everyone, but nobody wants to talk about it. Or rather, we leave it to make it an exclusive reserve of law enforcement agencies. So recently we launched this report, the West African Model Drug Law, which happened to be the second publication by the Commission. And I'll be taking us through this, some of the provisions of the law. These are the commissioners of the West African Commission on Drugs. It's been chaired by the former president of Nigeria, President Olusegun Obasanjo, and other former head of state, civil society representatives, advocates, practitioners that are leading in this sector within West Africa. So, providing some background, why a model drug law? I remembered when we were doing the first report that was launched by the Commission, which was titled Not Just in Transit, Drug the State in West Africa. We had some visit to some of the countries in discussion with some of the political heads. We were able to come to terms with the fact that the current practices are not good enough and the need for policies within the region to change, to be evidence-based. And many times, the question they ask us or pose to us is that, do you have a template of what we can adapt? Do you have a template of what we can look into, or a model law that we can use to guide our actions if now we want to review our laws? And at that very point in time, there wasn't anything in existence, and we felt a need or a challenge for us to begin to do something in that direction. Then, apart from that, also, the current laws within the region, and globally, we all can attest to this, that they are not providing the desired effect. The scale of the drug market is increasing, the arms related to drug use are increasing, so we can't really say, the prohibition approach is really working, or that our drug laws are actually working. There was a review also conducted in 2017 by the Commission and our partner IDPC, and the review also found a huge variation between national drug laws within West Africa country. Of course, most of them are based on prohibition, severe repression, and harsh sanctions for offenders. For instance, you have, like in a country like Nigeria, the penalty within the law for possession of drug use for personal, possession of drugs for personal consumption is a minimum of 15 years imprisonment and a maximum of 25 years imprisonment. And of course, you go to a country like Ghana, you have between 1 year to 10 years imprisonment. So there was a kind of a huge variation, of course, mostly repressive. And no distinction between use and trafficking in some of the countries. And in some of the countries also, they are beginning to review their laws, even though for some of them, they are already presenting harsher punishment for people who use drugs, thinking the stiffer the penalties are, the better or effective the control will be. So we found this as a gap or an opportunity for the Commission to step in and provide the required leadership in terms of what a model drug law should be. And one of the good things that the West African Commission on Drug has been able to do is to open up the space for drug policy debate within West Africa. Oftentimes, it has been a reserve of law enforcement officers. It has been a reserve of the criminal justice system, where even civil society organizations cannot openly debate the policy issues or else you'll be tagged as a trafficker or somebody that is interested in money laundering or otherwise. So the commission was able to open up the space that we need to talk about these issues. We need to have an holistic view of what the challenge is and bring all stakeholders on the table to discuss these challenges. So what do we, refer to as a model drug law? The model drug law provides model legislative provisions and commentary to support and harmonize national drug law reforms. Many of the countries within the region are thinking of reviewing their laws, but this model law is to provide a model legislative provisions for them, or a basis for them to do certain, perform certain actions or what they should be looking out for. This model drug law also, provide a base, measures required by the 3 UN drug control conventions. It reflects the UNGAS, the ECOWAS, and the AU commitment, because at the AUC, there are a lot of also progress being made, and this needs to trickle down to what is happening at, by the national governments at the country level as well. The model drug law reflects evidence of effectiveness and known best practices. We can't keep doing, like the common saying says, we can't keep doing things the same way and expect a different result. So if we feel our drug laws are not working at the moment, we need to do things in a different way, provide a different approach for us to have different results. And for this to happen, we need to look at what works. We need to focus on evidence. We need to bring evidence into drug policy reform. And this model drug law also explains the rationales behind the model provisions. So these are not just arbitrary provisions. It provides the rationale, the thinking, the mindset behind the provisions as well, and provide concrete template of what an ambitious, health-oriented drug law looks like. Oftentimes now, within the drug policy reform space, at the African continent, we've heard about a public health response, a public health approach. But a public health response and approach means different things to different stakeholders. So we need to be very careful to know what do we really mean about a public health, a health-oriented drug law. I've heard people in meetings where they say, oh yeah, we need a public health response. We arrest people who use drug, put them in prisons, and provide treatment for them in prisons. That is their own interpretation of what a public health response should be. But this law, model drug law, provides some information on this. Now, how was the model drug law developed? Now, this is also very important to us because we also, when we talk about drug policy reform, we shouldn't just be interested in the outcome, the final outcome of the reform process, but also about the how. How do we ensure that stakeholders, individuals who are going to be beneficiaries of these reforms are also involved, carried along in the process. So we built on the recommendation from the 2014 report, not just in transit, from report from the review done by the Commission and IDPC. There was also a regional expert meeting in Accra in September 2017 to establish the scope and the need for a model drug law. So bringing in stakeholders, members of the parliament, from the judiciary, other stakeholders within the region to get involved and engage in the debate. Lead drafters were recruited, and we had 2 rounds of consultation with regional and international experts. We ensured that people from the region, experts from the region, also made input into the process. They got hold of the draft document, reviewed it, try to see how, provide a context required for some of the provisions and see how this can be implemented within the region. So a sense of ownership was provided to all stakeholders in the process of developing this model drug law, so that the final outcome will also be something that everyone can own and not something that just comes from the outside. So in terms of structure of the report, there are 36 articles covering topics such as the classification of substances, powers of search and seizures, powers of arrest and detention, pretrial detention, alternatives to custody, creation of working groups, supply for medical purposes, and powers and duties of the court. So this model drug law is structured around 36 articles. It also has provision, sections on commentary and links to international conventions in order to provide a strong background for each of the provisions being made. Within the structure is also sentencing guidelines and indicative treasures for personal use. So what do we have in terms of the key provisions? In terms of treatment and harm reduction, these are some of the key provisions that were made in the model drug law. The need to protect and encourage the adoption of harm reduction in West Africa is a major key, recommendation. We know most of our drug laws and policies have been narrowly focused, talking about the 2 pillars, the need to expand the pillars to include harm reduction, the adoption of harm reduction and its implementation. Another key provision is the removal of paraphernalia laws that punish the possession of injecting equipment. In some of the existing laws, having paraphernalia, there are paraphernalia laws where, if you're an injecting drug user and you are caught with such instrument, you can also be arrested and jailed. It constitutes an offense. And that can be an impedance to provision of harm reduction services. So there was a provision for the removal of such laws within the laws that are already existing if we are talking about reform. It also promotes alternative sanctions, including drug treatment. And it specifies that treatment decisions should be made by qualified health professionals, not the criminal justice system. Now, this is an interesting provision because oftentimes we find cases where it's the law enforcement officers that decide whether an individual requires treatment or not. So it's like a case of having somebody who is not trained, for instance, somebody who is trained to handle guns, making a health decision on behalf of somebody who requires healthcare services. So this provision was actually made to ensure that decisions need to be made by health professionals and not the criminal justice system, or a situation whereby the court, within the court system, is the judge that decides whether you require treatment or not, or forceful detention, as we have seen in other crimes. It discourages the targeting of drug treatment and harm reduction facilities by the police. While we are talking about alternative to incarceration, provision of treatment and harm reduction services, if these centers are still target of law enforcement, it's kind of counterproductive. So there's need to discourage targeting drug treatment and harm reduction facilities by the police. Another key provision is on the criminal justice system. The first one speaks to ensuring that the burden of proof is on the prosecuting authority. We've found, since situations whereby an individual is described maybe by the state or targeted by the state to say, oh, you're involved in drug trafficking, and because of that, we're going to seize all your properties, and you need to prove to us that your belongings, your properties are not income from drug trafficking. And oftentimes, individuals lose such properties. So now, within the model drug law, the provision is saying, let the burden of proof, if the state, has an issue with an individual, let the burden of proof be on the state to prove that this, your proceeds are as a result of, crime or drug trafficking. It also includes due process to protect against abusive policing, the stop and search, extortion, recording of seizures. This is an issue that we find with the police, where people are indiscriminately arrested, stopped, searched, and sometimes even put in detention without access to justice. It also includes provision of health services and OST within detention centers. Our prison systems are places that we have ignored for a long time, not considering provision of services for people who are in need within that system. It also suggests improved mechanism for police oversight and complaints, and discourages the use of pretrial detention. Now, in some crimes, we've also found out that, you can hear, government officials telling you, okay, we no longer prosecute people who use drug, but we found out in real practice, the individuals are arrested, they are kept in a detention center and never prosecuted. So if you go to the prosecuting agency, you find that, look, you have no record of prosecution of people who use drugs, and you could immediately assume that drug users are no longer being prosecuted. However, they are within the pre-trial detention centers, some of them spending years, 3 years, 2 years, without taking to the court or without being provided any means for justice. Then proportionality and decriminalization. Drug use, consumption, possession, or acquisition for personal use is not considered a criminal offense. In terms of threshold, we followed what, a kind of the practice within the Portuguese model, amount for 10 days use. But just like Panini mentioned during his presentation, this is also, provide an opportunity for you to consult with people who use drugs and not just the healthcare providers making the decision around what the threshold should be. But the basic principle behind this is that possession or acquisition for personal use is no longer considered a criminal offense. Drug use is therefore decriminalized, still prohibited, but not sanctioned. Proportionate criminal penalties remain for drug trafficking. That is, drug trafficking is still an offense, and proportional sentencing should proportionate sentencing should also be provided. Sentencing should consider seriousness of offense, but also mitigating factors. Now, I give you an instance. We collected some data from one of the countries within the region recently about on people serving drug offenses within the prison system, and we found out that the sentencing varies. For instance, I might someone who is maybe caught with let's say 500 grams of cannabis is sentenced to some individual sentenced to 1 month imprisonment, and you see another individual with the same quantity of cannabis sentenced to 7 years imprisonment within the same country. There was also a situation of a young guy, about 23 years old, who was caught with 0.2 grams of cocaine and was given a maximum sentence of 25 years imprisonment. So this is, this is the reality. And in one of the fora where I was speaking, I said, by the time this individual comes out of the prison system, he's already going to be around 50 years of age, being given a maximum sentence for 0.2 gram of cocaine. So proportionality of sentencing, and also for those who are found within, who are even maybe dealing or involved in the illicit economy also. We need to understand some of the factors or their vulnerability, and there should be a proportional sentencing in that regard as well. Access to medicine was also covered in this model drug law, and it provides clear exemption for authorized medical use of otherwise prohibited substances. Substance use in drug treatment, like methadone, etc., are not prohibited. So these are some of the, it should be on the essential medicine list as part of the provision for the country. Naloxone is not prohibited to reverse opioid overdose, and it also allows for greater use of controlled medicine for pain relief. So we should have a law that does not stifle access to pain medication. Of course, recently we are aware of the clamor for scheduling of tramadol, and we know it's one of the pain medication that is easily accessible for people within the African setting. So scheduling and making it difficult to access, we provide greater burden for people who are actually in need of it. And this is also where evidence is required to inform policy making, because oftentimes, the major strength of tramadol being used within the hospital settings or approved are between the 50 milligram to 100 milligram of strength. But within the street, you find, tramadol of about 400 milligram of strength, 225 milligram of strength. So scheduling the illicit market will make things more difficult for people who are actually in need of this pain medication. It also allows health professionals to perform their duties without fear of reprisal. there are situations whereby allocations are made for essential medicines or pain medication, but medical personnel, professionals find it difficult to prescribe these drugs because they feel making some, having a lot of forms to fill or making some little mistake along the line can become so burdensome that some of them might have their licenses withdrawn. And because of that fear, they kind of like stay back from prescribing some of these substances. Then the need for government to constitute a commission on improving access to medicines that are controlled drugs, overseen by the Ministry of Health. This is very essential. Part of the provision is also on joint effort. It mandates an interministerial coordination mechanism to monitor drug control from a health and human rights perspective. So we shouldn't just be having an issue just for the criminal justice system. Everybody has a role to play. We need to begin to look at an holistic focus of what drug control should be. So an interministerial coordination mechanism needs to be set up at the country level where all relevant sectors are engaged and are allowed to be at a table when issues around drug control are being discussed. And more importantly, the health sector and the human rights defenders. It also mandates creation of a national drug strategies. How do we tackle this? And critical to this is the provision, the use of evidence of what works. You can hear, sometimes you can hear government telling you, yes, we are doing a lot, but what are you actually doing? Is it based on evidence? Is it based on what works? Are we evaluating our policies? Oftentimes government are very quick to evaluate their economic policies, but drug policies are rarely evaluated. It can go on for years and everybody feels it's okay. Let's keep doing things the same way we've been doing it. Links to other laws related to organized crime in terms of money laundering, corruption, etc., rather than replicating or undermining this, an holistic approach. Mandate participation in international processes such as the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. Over the years, we found that there's low participation or representation of people from the African setting, in this case, West African region at the CND, where decisions are also made on behalf of the continent or on behalf of the region without being at the table or having their voices being heard. And this is very important, just like some of the meetings that will be coming up very soon, even around tramadol and other essential medicines. It's good to have people from the region to speak up and have them at the table. So in terms of, these are the key provisions that we have within the model drug law. Of course, in terms of next steps, there was a launching that was done in September when this model drug law was officially presented in Dakar, September 11. And we've continued to disseminate the model drug law to government at the country level and using different opportunities to engage with relevant stakeholders on some of the key provisions within the model drug law. We are also looking at country-level advocacy needed to promote endorsement and adoption of the model drug law. We know it might be difficult for countries to, adopt this, within the region as a single, entity, but key provisions within the model drug law can be adopted and can provide a basis for reform that are ongoing within the countries. Also, an ongoing analysis of obstacles and challenges. As we are promoting this model drug law, we are also open to understand the obstacles and challenges to adoption of some of the key substance of the model drug law. And also, possible ongoing revision of the model drug law reflecting emerging evidence, experiences, and feedback. This is something that is not really cast in stone. It's something that is open for comments and emerging evidence and experiences on how best we, for us to have the best or the possible best law that can reduce the harms that comes with, drug issues within our region. And of course, promotion of the model drug law in international fora, just like, we're having it here. We keep talking about the substance of the model drug law and see how countries can replicate, adopt the substance of this model drug law for practices and implementation at the country level. So that's it. Thank you.